Hello there, and welcome to Murder Most British. I'm Zach, the American half, which means I'm the one who says sidewalk.
I'm Rachel, the British half, the one that has to remind him it's not a sidewalk while he's in England, it's a pavement.
It's the side where you walk.
When you're in America.
Well, no, it's wherever I am. I'm in America, 50-foot radius. Either way, this story isn't about where you walk, but where you end up if you cross the wrong people.
We'll begin on a July evening in 1974. A 6-year-old girl waited outside a back room in Belfast's Sandy Row. Inside, her mother was being judged, not by a court of law, but by neighbours who claimed authority in the name of a paramilitary group. What followed would shock even a city hardened by years of violence. This is the story of the Romper room murder, a killing carried out not by men with guns, but by women who believed that they were enforcing their community's code.
In the summer of 1974, Belfast was a city defined by conflict. The Troubles were in the midst of the most violent decade, and entire districts operated under the shadow of paramilitary groups. South Belfast's Sandy Row, close-knit Protestant neighborhood, was no exception. Streets of red brick terraces formed a small community where people knew each other's business, and where the influence of the Ulster Defence Association, or the UDA, was constant.
The UDA styled itself as a defender of Protestant areas, but its powers rested on fear as much as loyalty. Beyond its political voice, the organisation imposed order through intimidation. Locals could be summoned before improvised tribunals, kangaroo courts, where accusations were heard and sentences delivered without appeal.
Punishments ranged from warnings to beatings, and the buildings where these sessions took place became infamous as romper rooms, quote-unquote. The nickname, taken ironically from a children's television show, masked the brutality of what occurred behind those closed doors. It's just regular old, law into your own hands, vigilantism. Like, come on, you can't be doing that.
Who says you can't? No, I'm joking. No, you shouldn't really.
No. But they're just like, we're defenders of this, we're defenders of Protestants, because it's Protestant and Catholic fighting and all that shit. I'm not taking one side or the other, please. Don't. I'm just saying that, like, they're, in their mind, they're thinking, well, we have to protect our communities, keep ourselves in line with our values, all that shit.
Which I don't see a problem with that to an extent. It's just certain things, they shouldn't go, there should be a line, but having moral values of particular communities, yeah.
But I'm not going to beat someone.
Well, obviously, that's where I said, like, there's got to be boundaries on, you
but we do have,
far.
We do have boundaries. We do have niceties and saying thank you and whatnot. You have these set parameters. But if people are just taking it into their own hands to say, you did this thing, I'm going to beat you up now. And then there's no law, there's no appeal, there's no, where's your evidence? They just come out and accuse you. Yep, we heard this from Joe Bob's sister's cousin's mother. Yeah.
Well, while men dominated the ranks of the UDA, in Sandy Row, a women's unit developed its own authority. Mirroring the structure of male battalions, the unit patrolled, passed judgment, and enforced discipline.
At its head was Lily Douglas, a formidable figure in the district. Known locally as the leader of the quote-unquote heavy squad, she was regarded as decisive and uncompromising, with the power to target those she considered disloyal and disrespectful. And that's what I mean. You're disrespectful. Well, I don't care. Maybe I don't like you. Maybe I don't like what you do. That's my right to say, fuck you.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, just because someone's not respectful, they can kind of say, like, throwaway comments, or they could be rude to this person because they just don't like the look of them. Brush it off. It's like, is that really hurting you? But to, beat people or for just giving you a bad look or something, do you know what I mean? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, but it's your human right, really. Your freedom of speech to be able to say, I disagree with you and the way you operate and how you're doing this thing. And they're like, nope, can't do that. We all have to be on this strict moral code of our organization. No, Kiss my ass.
Like internal, like disrespect and stuff like that.
Yeah, but if you just live there
Yeah.
and they're like, you have to do it our way, no, then they pick you up and beat you. That's not freedom.
Were they promoting freedom though? No, clearly not. Under Douglas's leadership, the Women's Unit functioned as a law unto itself. They convened meetings, investigated perceived misbehaviour, and carried out punishments. The very presence of such a group blurred traditional roles.
Women were not only organizers or supporters, but active enforcers in a district where conformity was expected. Their reach extended into homes and families, dictating behavior as much as the men's unit did.
It was in this environment that Anne Ogilby lived. Anne was 31 years old, a Protestant woman raising 4 children amid the pressures of working class Belfast. Money was short, opportunities limited, and expectations rigid.
She had grown up locally and by the early 1970s was navigating life as a single mother. Her routines were ordinary, caring for her children, stretching a modest income, and maintaining her place in the community.
The ordinary was always under scrutiny. Reputation mattered, and gossip travelled quickly. For women like Anne, personal choices could draw criticism not only from neighbours but also from those who claimed the right to enforce moral standards. In areas controlled by paramilitaries, private matters could be transformed into public disputes.
The Romper brooms symbolized this power. They were spaces where order was imposed, often with brutality, and where individuals deemed troublesome were disciplined in ways that left lasting scars. By the mid-1970s, their reputation was well established, and the fear they inspired was part of everyday life in loyalist districts.
Sandy Row was also a community shaped by contradictions. Behind the tight-knit solidarity were currents of rivalry, resentment and suspicion. While the UDA claimed to protect its people, it also policed them. For some residents, this was a shield against crime or betrayal. For others, it meant living under constant threat or judgment.
And this is where I go back to this thing, like policing. It's policing with consent of the public. Well, like that means, the government that you elect can change laws that the police enforce. It's a top-down type, and bottom-up together. So that the people say, yep, we want this person to represent us because we want this law changed, blah, blah, blah. But if you just have this group that's like, hey, we're just going to have our own laws and our own code of conduct that you can't appeal, you can't change, that's not how it works.
Yeah, that sounds like, it just doesn't sound very good at all to be living in a time like that with, that dynamic situation.
Yeah, especially when you're dealing with the troubles and all the horrible stuff that happened. You also have to deal with these people that are lording over districts of places against your will. But into this fraught atmosphere stepped women like Lily Douglas and her followers. Their willingness to wield authority marked a departure from traditional gender roles, but it also set the stage for one of the most shocking acts of violence to emerge from the Troubles.
You wouldn't think that there'd be a lot of women that, would want to be sort of violent and stuff consistently. That's crazy. Like, it's normally a man thing, that are quite violent. Women don't tend to be violent, do they?
Absolute power corrupts, absolutely. That's once people gain power, some of them just it goes to their head and I can do anything. I can do whatever to anyone, but, because I have the authority to do so. That's so dangerous.
Yeah, very. Well, by July 1974, nothing on the surface suggested a particular crisis. Daily life in Sandy Row continued much as it had. Children playing in the streets, neighbours chatting outside, corner shops, and families making do amid the unrest of a divided city. Yet beneath that surface, tensions were brewing. Tensions that would soon converge with devastating consequences.
Conflict between Anne Ogilby and the Sandy Row Women's Unit did not emerge from politics, but from her personal life. Anne had entered into a relationship with William Young, a married man who was himself connected to the UDA. In a district where loyalty and appearances were closely monitored, this affair was seen as a public transgression.
Well, for Anne, the relationship offered companionship and a measure of stability, but for others, it became a source of resentment. Within a tightly bound community, affairs were rarely private matters.
Gossip spread quickly, and when a man with UDA ties was involved, the scrutiny sharpened. For some, Anne's relationship represented not only a moral lapse, but an affront to the authority of those who claimed to uphold community standards.
Well, Lily Douglas had long positioned herself as the arbiter of acceptable behaviour in Sandy Row. With her reputation for severity, she commanded loyalty among younger members of the unit and respect, even fear, from others in the district. Anne's affair with Young provided Douglas with an opportunity to exercise that authority.
Yeah, making an example of somebody, saying this is not what we do, this is how we enforce our moral code. And it's like, I'm already getting, she's power hungry.
Yeah.
She's sort of a dictator, saying you will adhere to our code around here.
Yeah.
You'll get the it's like, well, why is it any of your business? Like, come on.
Yeah, I think just, stepping into something that's actually probably not got nothing to do with you, doesn't affect you in any way. Do you know what I mean? And then obviously you're just going around like, oh, you can't do this, because I forbid it. You're like, hang on, you can't eat that carrot. I forbid it.
But even if you were like friends with them, why don't you just take them to the side and say, hey, this is not right. You should try to...
She obviously put the fear in them, isn't she? So if there's that fear, they probably just then...
But if you're not coming with them with like saying, hey, this is really not right. You're really going to hurt William's wife. That's not right. You shouldn't do that to a person. Maybe you guys should rethink, and get them at that level. Get them down to that level and say, well, how do you think his wife would feel? Yeah, maybe you guys should knock it off. But nope, can't do that. What might elsewhere have remained a private dispute became, under Douglas's leadership, a matter for paramilitary discipline. Her framing of the relationship as an insult to the community transformed whispers into an accusation that demanded action. For the women in her unit, defying Douglas was unthinkable. Instead, they aligned behind her judgment.
Among her most loyal followers were Henrietta Cohen, age 17, and Christine Smith, age 16. Both were teenagers still finding their place in a community dominated by conflict, but eager to prove themselves. Participation in Douglas's unit offered them a role in something larger, a sense of belonging in a neighbourhood where status often came from toughness and allegiance.
For Cohen and Smith, targeting Anne was an opportunity to demonstrate loyalty. This sounds like, I'm sorry, I gotta stop here. This sounds like a gang. Young kids being recruited. You better prove yourself to join our organization. You need to go beat this. It sounds like a gang.
Yeah. Run by some adult, recruiting teenagers. It's just ridiculous.
Crazy. Well, they absorbed Douglas's disdain for her and echoed it with their own resentment. The imbalance of power between them, teenagers empowered by Douglas versus an isolated mother struggling to maintain her footing, ensured the outcome would not be in Anne's favor.
The mechanism chosen to deal with Anne was familiar, a kangaroo court. Such courts were a hallmark of paramilitary control, designed to enforce obedience and instill fear.
Accusations were aired, the accused brought before the group, and a sentence declared. These proceedings carried no legal authority at all, but in districts like Sandy Row, they were as binding as any official judgment.
Well, for the women's unit, the decision was made quickly. Anne was to be brought before the court and rompered, a punishment that could mean a beating or worse. To the women involved, this was not a matter of politics, but of control, a chance to demonstrate the reach of their authority.
Around the neighborhood, rumors began to circulate. Anne's name was mentioned in connection with the women's unit, and those who heard the whispers understood the implications. That'd be super scary. But to be summoned to a romper room was to face humiliation, violence, or even death. Yet Anne herself carried on with her routines, caring for her children, unaware or unwilling to believe how far her neighbor's resentment had gone.
Well, by July 1974, the decision had been sealed. The court was convened, the location chosen, and the participants selected. Douglas presided, Cohen and Smith were ready to carry out orders, and the unit prepared to make an example of Anne.
On the surface, Sandy Row's daily life continued unchanged, but for Anne, unseen forces in her own community were preparing to bring her before a tribunal from which there would be no escape.
On the afternoon of 24th of July 1974, Anne Ogilby stood outside a social services office at Shaftesbury Square with her 6-year-old daughter. The day before, members of the Sandy Row UDA Women's Unit had staged a kangaroo court in a disused bakery, deciding she should receive a romper in. That Wednesday, the sentence moved from talk to action.
A UDA man, Albert Bumper Graham, pulled up. What a nickname is that? Bumper. I wonder how the hell.
Yeah, it's probably because it bumps people off. It's nicknamed Bumper.
Oh, that is quite plausible.
Or it drives into people. I don't know.
I hit you with my bumper.
Heard weird nicknames, to be fair.
Well, old Bumper pulled up in a blue minibus and told Anne a commander wanted to speak with her. She willingly got in. Reassured by the pretext, her daughter climbed in too. Women from the unit who had been waiting nearby in the Regency Hotel lounge overlooking the office followed on.
The minibus took them not to Anne's home, but to a disused bakery on Hunter Street in Sandy Row, a building already used as a UDA club and romper room. Neighbours in the district knew the spot by reputation, back rooms where discipline was delivered far from prying eyes. As the women's unit led the way inside, Anne sensed the danger and tried to bolt, but she was grabbed and forced upstairs. The timing was deliberate. The same site had hosted the court the previous day. Now it was the host of the punishment.
Before the assault began, Graham had sent Anne's child to a corner shop for sweets, removing her from the room. Upstairs, Anne was made to sit on a wooden bench. A hood was placed over her head.
Douglas had already chosen the executioners, 2 teenage members, Cohen and Smith. Their instructions were blunt: carry out the romper in. The euphemism masked what was about to happen. Inside the upstairs room, the romper in began. Cohen and Smith set upon Anne with bricks and sticks in a sustained, frenzied beating. Other women were present, some restrained, some encouraged, and at least one tried to interrupt as the minutes dragged into the better part of an hour. What was made sounded ritualistic, but was, in fact, deliberate blunt force violence conducted in a small, airless room above a shuttered shop front.
The assault's duration and severity would later be spelled out in the postmortem. 24 separate blows to the head and body, 14 of them causing severe fractures to the bulk of the skull. Heartbreakingly, when Anne's daughter, Charlene, returned from the shop, she banged on the bakery door and heard her mother screaming and pleading inside. She did not discover the body, but she heard it all.
I mean, it doesn't sound like it was a plan to just do a beating. You know, they beat this person to death. You know, it wasn't just a beating.
But also, all it takes is one hit.
Well, yeah.
One
We've
good
seen
hit
that
to
in-
the head. Yeah, one good hit to the head, and that's poop,
Jesus.
done. And they just absolutely savaged her so bad.
But that was, is that what their outcome was? You know, what was it? Was it to beat her to death? Do you know what I mean? And not just receive the romper in, which is supposed to be just a beating, you know?
But this is where it comes down to, like, they Douglas had probably whipped these girls up into a frenzy. You better prove your loyalty. You better give her a good beating. And they just went fucking wild and just beat the absolute crap out of her too far.
Well, in the room itself, the physical story was already being written. Blood tracking across the floorboards, splintered wood, and smears on the makeshift furniture that served as both dock and bench. But in that moment, stripped of forensic language, it was simply the sound of repeated strikes and a hooded woman begging for it to stop.
Inside this bakery, the space gave the women's unit an area to summon people, judge them, and beat them just for their own moral code. But by the looks of it, They'd went too far.
Well, Anne's supposed offences were a tangle of grievance and control, an affair with a married man, a UDA man, public remarks that embarrassed another member, and the unit's view that she was loud, unconventional, and a troublemaker. However they rationalised it, what followed was not discipline, it was homicidal.
Hey, that sounds like you. Loud, unconventional, troublemaker.
But not homicidal. Thankfully.
Well, no, that's how they viewed Anne. That she was just loud, unconventional, troublemaker, all that.
Listen, I can't be, blamed for being unique and special and,
I don't think that it was those labels were good enough for them to do this. That's I don't like that person because they're loud and unconventional and a quote unquote troublemaker. It's what did they actually do? That's so stupid.
There's some people I've come across in the world that I'm like, God, my God, I can't stand her. I wouldn't order a beating for it,
Yeah, it's like, I just don't like this guy. Let's just get some sticks and bricks and beat him to death. That's just so insane.
It's ridiculous.
That's a
ridiculous
good thing to
behavior.
do.
Ridiculous.
As the beating continued, Douglas remained the authority in the room. The teenagers, her chosen hands. The gap between a good rompering and murder was closing with each strike.
In the stale heat of the bakery's upper floor, the unit's sentence was being carried out in real time. By the time the blows stopped, the outcome was beyond any euphemism the unit used to dress their violence.
The beating stopped only when Henrietta Cowan, catching sight of Anne's hood stained with blood, signaled the attack had gone too far, even though the cruelty hadn't just neutralized the victim, it had killed her.
Anne was left motionless on the floor. The assault had lasted over an hour. The hood remained effectively acting as both blindfold and shroud over the violence it concealed.
Left with the body beyond saving, those present faced their first practical question, disposal. Lily Douglas, who had orchestrated the event, arranged for a UDA man to retrieve Anne's body, later loaded into a van and dumped in a ditch on Stockman's Lane near the M1 motorway.
Meanwhile, Anne's child, Charlene, had already been taken away. Albert Graham had escorted her outside, telling her simply that her mother was inside waiting. He drove Charlene back to the YMCA hostel where she was placed into the care of social services.
Gross.
I mean, that poor kid, wondering where her mum is and, from hearing all the screams and stuff.
Yeah.
Not knowing.
No, and she knows it's her voice.
Yeah, horrendous.
And then they're like, just pick her up, put her in a van and throw her in a ditch. Fucking.
No respect at all.
It's just mind-boggling. But it's that groupthink. They're like, well, she had to come in or all this shit. And you're just like, there's no way you can justify this, you absolute monster. And then go dump her off in a fucking ditch somewhere.
Like cultish behavior. It's absolutely abhorrent.
It gets worse. Well, more disgusting behavior because carrying on as though nothing had happened, Cowan and Smith went out to a disco, as though the night's horror had not occurred. This brutal contrast, returning to normalcy while leaving a murdered woman in a ditch, deepened the sense of calculated cruelty of the act.
5 days after the murder, on the 29th of July 1974, road maintenance workers discovered Anne's body in that ditch by the M1. She lay partially submerged in shallow water, wearing a red jumper and a single shoe, wrapped in part in a brown sack, her face battered and unrecognisable.
When the road workers discovered her body, they immediately called the police, and the Royal Ulster Constabulary moved in immediately to secure the scene, gathering any sort of evidence that might be nearby to help in the investigation.
Belfast was a city already saturated with death, but this case was different. A woman from a Protestant community killed not by paramilitary rivals, but by members of her own side. That distinction demanded a clear and public investigation.
The first priority was identification. News outlets quickly circulated descriptions of the body and personal effects, but a social worker who had arranged to meet Anne that afternoon that she disappeared recognized the description of her rings and formally identified her at the mortuary. With the victim named, detectives were able to connect her disappearance on the 24th of July with the discovery 5 days later.
Attention then turned to Anne's 6-year-old daughter. By the time of her mother's death, she had been placed in social services care. During a carefully managed interview, she recalled being taken with Anne to a bakery on Hunter Street, a building used by the Sandy Row UDA Women's Unit.
She described hearing her mother's screams from behind the upstairs door, naming several of the women present and recounting details of their clothing. It was the kind of direct, first-hand statement investigators almost never obtained in paramilitary cases, where silence and intimidation normally shut down witnesses. No, yeah. It's like, don't talk.
Yeah.
It's like a mafia. Like, see, gang.
Yeah.
It's a gang.
It is
And they're
gang
like,
behaviour.
it's like, you don't talk. I don't care what we're the authority here. It's like, well,
Yeah.
no. The police, like, no.
Sometimes these cases, though, when we do read them, it just makes us want to, really kind of like cast and just be, because we're shocked as well by,
It made me angry.
yeah.
That little girl hearing her mom get beat to death. Like, are you kidding me?
Well, yeah, because you just put yourself in that position and imagine how that little girl felt, how terrified she would have been, and not knowing fully what was the hell was going on to her mum, but knowing that her mum was being hurt, in some way. Anyways, the account that she gave the detectives a concrete lead. A scenes of crime officer was dispatched to the Hunter Street bakery the same day. Inside, the room bore unmistakable signs of violence. Bloodstains, broken sticks, and bricks splattered with traces consistent with blunt force assault. So they obviously hadn't cleaned up.
Why would they? They're the authority, remember? That's how they think. They're like, oh, well, whatever. It got done. We'll just move on. Bring someone else up here, then they'll see the blood in that, and it's fear. Laboratory tests later confirmed the blood matched Anne's. Documents bearing William Young's name were found in the bakery, tying the scene back to the jealousy and resentment that had motivated the women's hostility.
Even with forensic support, progress was not guaranteed. The investigation unfolded in Sandy Row, a working-class loyalist district where the UDA functioned as the authority. RUC officers entering the neighbourhood faced closed doors and hostile stares.
Residents feared the consequences of cooperating. To be seen as an informer carried risks as severe as the punishments handed down in the Romper rooms. Many admitted that they had seen Anne being led away, but almost all stopped short of naming names. This culture of fear was a constant obstacle in Belfast policing throughout the Troubles.
But still, the child's testimony and the forensic trail were enough to keep the case alive. Detectives began mapping the structure of the Sandy Row Women's Unit, cross-checking intelligence files and community reports.
A picture quickly emerged for the police. Lily Douglas was identified as the unit's leader, with Cowan and Smith among her closest young associates. The evidence suggested that these three had been central to the assault that ended in Anne's death.
With the suspects identified, the RUC began to prepare for arrests. Within weeks of the killing, 10 women and 1 man were taken into custody, most of them linked to the Sandy Row Women's Heavy Squad.
Douglas, Cowan, and Smith, who would eventually stand at the center of the prosecution, but the breadth of the arrest sent a message. This was not a case that could be brushed aside as an internal squabbling. It was a murder investigation of national significance.
Interrogations were conducted under fraught conditions. Lily Douglas admitted to her role in leading the women's unit and acknowledged her authority at the disciplinary hearing, but she denied participating in the beating itself.
Cowan and Smith initially attempted to minimize their involvement, offering fragmented and contradictory accounts. But their own words, along with the testimony of witnesses and the evidence from the bakery, only drew them tighter into the net.
The fact that women were the perpetrators made the case highly unusual. In Belfast, paramilitary violence was almost universally associated with men, with women seen as supporters, couriers, and organisers. The Ogilby murder shattered that stereotype.
Here, women had not only presided over the kangaroo court, but had physically carried out a punishment that escalated into murder, which is just unheard of. And on top of that, the two that carried it out were just teens, 17 and 16 years old, which is shocking in itself. But that shows the power dynamic, the gang mentality. Douglas exerting her dictatorial power over these two, saying you're a part of something, and who knows? Well, really, I wonder if these girls were from poverty, didn't have a lot of family or stable family, and this was a chance for them to join something.
I mean, more than likely at that age, I think as a parent myself, there's no way that you would allow if you were known of this situation, them being basically enrolled into this type of violent, you wouldn't allow it, would you? So maybe they.
But with the whole power structure
Mm,
and how they exuded this power over this area,
mm.
maybe the parents were like, "Heck, I don't know if I could say anything," or if they did say something, they'd get beaten.
But then again, I mean, the parents could have been involved, in this type of behavior themselves or just were part of that group, due to fear or so. Yeah. But these young girls being intimidated into following and joining this type of um horrible, sounded like a gang group.
But also, like you said, the parents could be involved. So maybe they
Mm,
were sort of indoctrinated into this thinking,
yeah.
and they were all in.
It was the thing to do. It's what they're being brought up to be a part of. So yeah, more than likely.
Mm.
Press coverage seized on those details. Newspapers described the women as the heavy squad and romper room girls, language that highlighted both the brutality of the act and its departure from expectation.
So the RUC, the attention had a double edge. It increased the public pressure to secure convictions, but also amplified the risk of pursuing the case within a hostile district.
Reaction within the UDA itself was telling. Though the organisation regularly sanctioned beatings and romperings for those it deemed troublesome, the murder of Anne Ogilby prompted rare internal condemnation. To kill a woman practically in front of her child over grievances tied to jealousy and gossip rather than political or security matters.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a paramilitary group and you're like, oh, well, they're just gossip, I don't want this to sound in a bad way, but like just gossiping women. But women can be very harsh on each other, on other women.
Yeah, when it comes to like gossipy stuff, obviously,
Dealing with
yeah,
relationships and stuff like that. They can be really harsh, and their most harshest critics
mm,
are other women.
yeah, 100% agree with you on that.
So it didn't have anything to do with their security or political stuff that's been going on during the Troubles. It was just her having an affair with this guy,
Yeah,
which
and then just using that as an excuse to carry out what they carried out.
yeah, and it went too far.
Meaningless, absolutely meaningless.
Yeah. Well, this was seen as damaging to the UDA's image. In response, its leadership disbanded the Sandy Row Women's Unit entirely, distancing themselves from the killing. That move gave the RUC a measure of space to press forward without the full obstruction that usually followed the paramilitary arrest.
By late 1974, detectives had assembled a case strong enough to hand to prosecutors. The daughter's eyewitness testimony, corroborated by forensic evidence from the bakery, witness accounts that placed Anne with the accused, and admissions of involvement at various levels from those under arrest. What had begun as a daunting inquiry into one of Belfast's most tightly controlled districts had been transformed into a viable murder case.
In a city where many killings of the Troubles passed unsolved into silence, the investigation into Anne Ogilby's death stood out through persistence, forensic evidence, and the extraordinary courage of a child witness. The RUC had built a file that could not be ignored. Which that's so sad though. Like a lot of stuff just went unsolved because people didn't want to talk. And this is where this gang mentality and shutting people down
Putting
and
fear in the community.
yeah, and not letting justice be served the way it should be. They want it to be served the way they want it to be served. And if that means, well, you can't really solve, nobody's going to come out and say who really murdered this person, then that family of that murdered person can never know justice.
Yeah.
And that is So fucked up.
Well, the case was ready for court, and the women of Sandy Row's UDA unit would soon find themselves answering for one of the most shocking murders of the decade.
The trial arising from the murder of Anne opened at Belfast Crown Court in 1975, less than a year after Anne's body was discovered.
Both the authorities and the public understood the case was unlike anything the courts had seen before. 3 women, 1 a recognised unit leader and 2 still in their teens, charged in connection with a brutal paramilitary killing.
The charges set out by the Crown reflected the roles attributed to each person. Cowan and Smith faced charges of murder. They were alleged to have carried out the assault that caused Anne's death.
Elizabeth Lily Douglas faced a charge of manslaughter. The prosecution argued that she had presided over the kangaroo court the day before and authorised the beating that led directly to Anne's killing.
Nah, I think she should have got done for murder.
Yeah, I mean, it's premeditated, like to an extent.
She had all this power over these young girls
Mm.
to do it. And those girls probably would have faced harsh consequences if they didn't do it. So, in a sense, in my opinion, she's just as guilty as those girls.
Well, I think you have that in America, don't you? If
Kind of a
somebody is there at the time of somebody being murdered, you would still get charged with murder alongside the ones that actually pulled the trigger or.
Yeah, depending on their involvement.
Yeah.
Like if you're a leader, like let's say you're a gang leader and you're there and you say, kill this man.
Mm.
Well, that person, yes, they killed him.
Mm. But it was on
your orders to do so. If
but
they
then
didn't do it,
Mm.
then more than likely the gang leader would be like, well, if you
Mm.
don't do it, I'm going to kill you. And then I'm going to kill him. So you might as well do it. It's that ruling by fear, like we said before. Awful.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, with this case so far, she, as far as we're aware within our research, she didn't order them to kill the girl, but just to give the woman a beating. So I do get where they're coming from in that sense for the manslaughter charge, but
True.
I still think that even if her authoritative instruction was just to beat this lady, but they actually beat her to death, then she should be under that murder charge as well.
And because, like I said, all it takes is one hit to the head.
Yeah.
And they're dead.
Yeah.
But in his opening, the prosecutor outlined the evidence. Medical reports were introduced documenting the injuries and the skull fractures. The pathologist's conclusion was blunt. Anne died from head injuries sustained during the prolonged and violent assault. The jury was told that there was no ambiguity surrounding the cause of her death.
Witnesses began to take the stand. Among them were neighbours who had seen Anne and her daughter taken into the minibus on the day of her disappearance. Their recollections placed her family in the custody of UDA members in Sandy Row.
More crucially still was the testimony of poor little 6-year-old Charlene, carefully handled in court. She recounted being taken with her mother to the bakery, being sent to buy sweets, and then returning to hear her mother's screams through the closed upstairs door. Though traumatized, her testimony identified Cowan and Smith as the women involved.
Supporting this was the forensic evidence from the bakery. Photographs showed bloodstains on floorboards, walls, consistent with blunt force impact. Broken sticks and bricks recovered from the room were produced in court also.
Then the tests confirmed the blood was Anne's perfect match. The discovery of documents linking William Young provided context for the resentment that had motivated the women's hostility. By the time the Crown had finished presenting its case, the roles were clear. Cowan and Smith had delivered the fatal blows. Douglas had sanctioned the punishment and ensured it was carried out. Other women present had acted as guards or enforcers, while male associates provided transport. The picture painted was not of an isolated outburst, but a planned, organized paramilitary action dressed up as, quote-unquote, discipline.
Well, the defence strategy sought to divide responsibility and cast doubt on individual involvement. Douglas admitted her position in the unit but denied ordering lethal violence. Cowan and Smith, represented separately, initially contested the murder charge, suggesting exaggeration or misidentification.
Their barristers pressed witnesses on their memories and attempted to weaken the reliability of forensic links. Yet the accumulation of testimony, medical evidence, and Charlene's testimony weighed heavily. As proceedings continued, the strength of the prosecution's evidence became undeniable. Faced with this overwhelming evidence and everything, Cowan and Smith changed their pleas to guilty, which I'm like, yeah, okay. You're staring down the barrel there. Might as well be like, yeah.
Like we said in many before, you can't hide the evidence is the evidence. You can't run from the evidence.
Yeah, like old Ruxton there.
Exactly.
His only defense was, these guys said I'm a great guy. You don't have a whole lot, of a leg to stand on.
Exactly. Evidence is key to the truth coming out.
Yeah.
So you might as well own up to it. Their admissions, though, spared the court the need for a full deliberation on the facts of their actions, but they confirmed the central claim of the Crown that Anne had been murdered inside the Hunter Street bakery by members of the UDA Women's Unit.
I would have been like, yeah, we know. You're just telling us something we already know. We've got you. But with their guilty pleas entered, attention shifted to sentencing. Both teenagers were detained for life at the pleasure of the Secretary of State, the youth equivalent of a life sentence in Northern Ireland at the time. While acknowledging their youth, he stated that the savagery of the assault, the repeated blows to a defenseless woman, and the deliberate nature of the attack left the court with no alternative. It was a rare instance of teenage girls being consigned to life terms for murder in Northern Ireland. That's wild. That is, I say girls, just women. They were pretty almost women, adults.
I wonder if we'll find out whether they've been released or not. Let's have a look. So Lily Douglas, meanwhile, was convicted of manslaughter. Though she did not strike the fatal blow, her leadership had made the crime possible. For that, she received 10 years in prison. Other figures associated with the unit also appeared in the dock.
Several women, along with a male associate, were convicted of offenses ranging from unlawful assembly to assisting in Anne's abduction, their sentences spanning shorter custodial terms, reflecting that their participation in a broader operation. Together, these convictions made it clear that the court viewed the killing as a collective act, not merely the isolated actions of two teenagers.
Reaction in the courtroom was somber. For Anne's family, the verdicts brought confirmation of what they had already known. She had been lured, beaten, and murdered by members of her own community.
For the public, the image of Cowan and Smith being led away to begin life sentences was shocking. Newspapers carried photographs of the two teenagers alongside the headlines describing the Romper Room murder, emphasizing the unprecedented spectacle of women condemned for such an act.
Commentators described the trial as a watershed. The Troubles had produced countless killings, but very few involved women in such direct and brutal roles. The fact that this killing arose not from a clash with state forces or political enemies, but from jealousy, resentment, and paramilitary discipline made it stand apart.
Denouncing the UDA, the trial judge, Mr. Justice McGonigal, stated, quote, "I do not know what constitutes a paramilitary organization. What appears before me today under the name of the UDA is gun law, a vicious, brutalizing organization of persons who take the law into their own hands and who, by kangaroo courts and the infliction of physical brutality, terrorize a neighborhood through intimidation and rule an area of this city."
By the end of 1975, the state had secured convictions for one of the Trouble's most shocking inter-community killings. For once, in a city where fear often silenced witnesses and paramilitaries operated beyond the reach of law, the killers were not only identified but sentenced.
The trial of Cowan, Smith, and Douglas ensured that the murder of Anne Ogilby would remain etched in Northern Ireland's memory, not as an unsolved atrocity, but as a case where justice was seen to be done. The UDA leadership moved to contain the fallout. While punishment beatings were common, the murder of a Protestant mother for personal grievances was indefensible. Within weeks, the Sandy Row Women's Unit was disbanded, its members denounced as an embarrassment to the organization. That step, unusual in the UDA's history, reflecting how damaging the crime had become to its standing.
Convictions in court marked one of very few occasions during the Troubles where those behind such an attack were swiftly identified, arrested, and sentenced. For the Royal Ulster Constabulary, it was a rare success in a period where fear and silence often blocked investigations. Detectives later acknowledged that the courage of Anne's young daughter, who identified her mother's killers, was decisive in overcoming the community's reluctance to cooperate.
For Anne's family, the aftermath was deeply personal. Charlene was placed in long-term care, left to grow up with the memory of hearing her mother's screams and later testifying about it in court. Relatives faced the added cruelty of knowing that Anne's death had not been inflicted by political enemies, but by women she knew, neighbors, whose authority came from intimidation rather than justice.
But by the end of 1975, trials were over. The case lingered in public memory. Belfast had endured many killings, yet this one refused to fade into statistics. The Romper Room murder stood as a stark reminder of how paramilitary justice could descend into lawless brutality, leaving a community shamed and a family devastated.
In the years that followed, the Romper Room murder became one of the most notorious cases of the Troubles. The nickname itself, once used cynically to describe the UDA's punishment rooms, became inseparable from Anne Ogilby's death. It stood as shorthand for the dangers of paramilitary justice, arbitrary, brutal, and unchecked.
For historians and the public alike, the case took on an added significance because of who the perpetrators were. Paramilitary violence in Northern Ireland was overwhelmingly male, yet here 2 teenage girls and their female leader had carried out a killing of startling savagery.
The image of Henrietta Cowan and Christine Smith, barely out of school, serving life sentences for murder, challenged assumptions about the roles women played in the conflict.
The murder also exposed the risks of kangaroo courts. These informal hearings, staged in back rooms by local paramilitaries, dispensed punishments ranging from warnings to severe beatings.
Yeah, you don't get no lawyer, you don't get no appeal, there's no discovery of evidence and all this. It's just, we got this info, you're guilty, take a beating. It's just so fucking dumb. Come on. But Anne's case revealed how easily such discipline could turn lethal and how personal resentment could be disguised as community justice. The fact that her killing stemmed not from the political motives, but just jealousy and gossip, that underscored the arbitrariness of such systems.
Well, for the RUC and wider justice system, the case became a rare example of persistence paying off. Forensic work in the bakery, combined with community testimony and a child witness, overcome the culture of silence that usually frustrated the investigations. It showed that convictions were possible, even in the most hostile environments, provided evidence was secured and pursued with determination.
The longer-term legacy is also bound up in the experience of Anne's daughter, Charlene. Her presence on the day of the murder, hearing the assault and later identifying, became a haunting symbol of the way children were drawn into the violence of the Troubles. Yes, her testimony secured the justice, but at a profound personal cost, illustrating the deep scars left on the youngest by the conflict.
Yeah, well, today the murder of Anne Ogilby is remembered not for its scale, but for its cruel intimacy. It was a killing carried out by neighbours, sanctioned by paramilitary authority and witnessed by a child. It remains one of the Trouble's most shocking reminders that the greatest danger did not always come from across sectarian lines, but sometimes from within a community itself.
Well, that was the Romper Room murder of Anne Ogilby.
So that
was a tough one.
That was just a kind of what's going on now. So I actually researched, you don't know this, Zach. But no, I just wanted to find out whether, when they got released and if they got released. And they actually did. So Lily Douglas, she died shortly after being released from Armagh prison. I can't remember. I think it was called that. The prison spelled Armagh, Armagh prison. Anyway, so she was released on compassionate grounds in 1979. So she had only served 4 years, which was a shame, you know. So she obviously got sentenced 10 years and served 4. As for Cohen and Smith, they were both released from the same prison in December 1983. So they only served 9 years, which was actually quite terrible. When you hear, oh, it's a life sentence, and then they serve 9 years, that doesn't sound
It's
like.
unfortunate because it's because they were young, they were underage, kind of like Harold Jones, where he was under the age, so he had to go be at His Majesty's pleasure.
Yeah.
But he did 20 years.
Yeah, so these both done 9 years, and they actually returned back to the Sandy Row area. So, yeah, I mean, doing that and then going back to where the crime happened is a bit of a strange one,
Obviously,
really.
all their families there and that. So where else are they going to go?
Yeah. Well, Charlene was doing really well as an adult. She went on to marry and have 3 children of her own. So, by all accounts, she had a good life after.
Yeah, good.
But yeah, so it's a sad story. It's a sad case, definitely. Anyways, thanks for listening. Please follow us. Also, give us a like, comment, and give us a 5-star rating. It really helps. Find us at Murder Most British on Instagram and TikTok, and MMB Podcast on Facebook.
We do have a link tree for everyone, so you can follow us down below. So until next week, stay safe and stay curious.
Bye-bye, guys.